Brian Entin said something last week. Something quiet. Something that if you blinked, if you were half listening, if you were watching while you were doing something else, you might have missed entirely. He was not screaming it. He was not flashing it across a headline. He was not leading a broadcast with it the way networks lead with breaking developments. He said it the way journalists say the things that matter most. Carefully, precisely, embedded inside a longer report, with the exact kind of specific technical language that tells you he understands the full weight of what he is describing. He explained why the DNA results in the Nancy Guthrie case are taking this long, and what he revealed, confirmed by 2 forensic scientists, documented in court-adjacent records, corroborated by the FBI Director of the United States, is not what you think. It is not a lab backlog. It is not bureaucratic delay. It is not investigators sitting on results they already have. It is not the story that most people, following this case from the beginning, have been telling themselves to explain the silence from Quantico. The real reason is something far more specific, far more scientifically complicated, and far more revealing about the state of this investigation than anything that has been said on television in the last 3 months. Tonight, we break it down completely. Every layer, every technical detail, every institutional decision that shaped where the DNA evidence is right now, and why. And we do it using the specific reporting Brian Entin produced, the specific science the forensic experts he interviewed explained, and the specific institutional record that the FBI director made public in May. This is Guthrie Records. Subscribe now if you have not already. And stay until the end of this video, because the final piece of this picture, the piece that explains not just where the DNA evidence is, but where it is going, is the piece that nobody is talking about clearly enough. Let's start with the moment Brian Entin first broke this open. Not in June, not in April. The moment was March 7th, and the specific thing he reported that day was the thing that should have ended the public's simplified understanding of why there were no DNA results. He was on News Nation, reporting from Tucson, and he said this. He said investigators are having problems getting the DNA into different databases. He said that may take more time than we expected. Problems getting it into different databases, not problems running a test, not problems with a backlog, problems getting it into different databases. That sentence is a compressed technical story, and to understand why that sentence matters, why it is the beginning of the real answer to why the DNA results are taking this long, you have to start further back. You have to start with the basic science of what the DNA in this case actually is, and what is actually being asked of it. Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her home in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona on the night of January 31st into February 1st, 2026. The evidence recovered from inside her home included blood on the front porch, a glove, and hairs, including at least one rootless hair, collected from inside the house. In the first days of the investigation, that evidence was collected by the Pima County Sheriff's Department, and here is where the first decision was made. A decision that the FBI Director of the United States, Kash Patel, would publicly call out 3 months later from Sean Hannity's podcast. Sheriff Chris Nanos did not send that evidence to the FBI. He sent it to DNA Labs International, a private laboratory in Florida, a lab the sheriff's office had worked with before, a lab that is not the FBI laboratory at Quantico, Virginia, a lab that does not have the full forensic genealogy pipeline, the mixture deconvolution resources, or the institutional infrastructure that the case was going to require. And simultaneously, meaning at the same time the sheriff was sending the DNA to Florida, the FBI had a plane on standby, a plane ready to fly, ready to take the evidence directly to Quantico, the premier forensic laboratory in the United States, the institution that has solved the cases nobody else could solve. The FBI's plane sat on the tarmac. The evidence went to Florida. FBI Director Kash Patel later described the first 4 days of this investigation in specific language. He said, "For 4 days we were kept out of the investigation." He said, "The first 48 hours of anyone's disappearance are the most critical." And he specifically criticized the decision to send the DNA to a private lab in Florida rather than to Quantico. The director of the FBI, not a commentator, not a podcaster, not a true crime YouTube channel, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation said publicly on a nationally distributed podcast that the Pima County Sheriff kept the FBI out of this investigation for 4 days at the most critical window in any missing persons case. That decision, made in a conference room or a phone call or a corridor of the Pima County Sheriff's Department in the first hours of February 2026, is the origin point of everything that follows. It is the first link in a chain of delays that explains exactly why, 4 months later, We are still waiting for DNA results. Here is what DNA Labs International in Florida did with the evidence. Because it is important to be precise about what happened there, rather than simply treating it as a failed institutional decision and moving on. The lab ran standard forensic analysis. They processed the samples using the methodology that forensic labs use for biological evidence in criminal investigations. They ran the profiles through CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database containing more than 20 million profiles of convicted offenders, qualifying arrestees, and voluntarily submitted profiles. And CODIS returned what it returns when the person who left the evidence has never been arrested, never been convicted, never submitted their DNA to any law enforcement database. Nothing. Not nothing as in the evidence failed. Nothing as in the answer the database gave was accurate. This person is not in here. There is no hit because this profile does not match any profile already in this system. But here's the specific complication that the Florida lab also discovered, the one that Brian Entin reported in March, the one that turned a straightforward negative database result into something far more scientifically serious. The DNA was mixed. Not mixed as in slightly contaminated, not mixed as in two family members whose profiles overlap in minor ways. Mixed as in a forensic sample containing the genetic material of more than one person. Nancy Guthrie, whose profile was known, plus at least one unknown individual, possibly two, possibly more. Fox News Digital reported at the time, sourcing law enforcement, the mixed DNA inside Guthrie's home had provided only a partial profile, which was insufficient to check against CODIs. Partial profile, insufficient to check against CODIs. Those four words are the scientific wall that the Florida lab hit. And the wall they hit is not a wall of incompetence. It is not a wall of negligence. It is a wall that exists because of what DNA mixtures are and what they do to the standard forensic analysis pipeline. Let's go deep into the science here, because Brian Entin went deep into the science and the experts he brought onto News Nation and onto the Nancy Guthrie Mystery Special went deep into the science. And if you are going to understand why the results are taking this long, you need to understand exactly what a complex DNA mixture is. Standard forensic DNA analysis, the kind that fills CODIS with 20 million profiles, the kind that has been used in courtrooms since the late 1980s, works by examining specific predetermined locations in the human genome called short tandem repeats, STRs. At each of these locations, a person has two copies of a repeated genetic sequence, one inherited from each parent. The number of repetitions at each location is variable across individuals. You measure 13 to 20 of these locations. You get a numerical pattern. That pattern is the STR profile. It is the forensic DNA fingerprint. When you have a single source sample, one person's blood, one person's saliva, one person's hair follicle, this works cleanly. You measure the STR locations. You get two numbers per location. You generate the profile. You upload it to CODIS. Either it matches something in the database or it does not. Clean, direct, court admissible. Now here is what happens when you have a mixture. When more than one person's DNA is present in the same sample, every STR location you measure returns not two numbers, but potentially 4, 6, 8, however many alleles are present across all the contributors. The pattern is no longer a clean two-column fingerprint. It is a pile of overlapping data that contains the fingerprints of multiple individuals, all stacked on top of each other. When the mixture has two contributors, a simple mixture, trained analysts can often separate those profiles manually or with software, particularly if one of the contributors is a known reference individual whose profile can be mathematically subtracted from the mixture. You take out the known contributor's profile, and what is left is the unknown contributor's profile. Upload that to CODIS, check for a match. But the Nancy Guthrie evidence is not a simple two-person mixture. CeCe Moore, the chief genetic genealogist at Parabon Nanolabs, the person who has personally used DNA evidence to resolve more than 300 previously unsolvable cold cases, described the specific challenge of the Nancy Guthrie evidence in a People magazine interview. She said, "A complex mixture is much more difficult to work with. The more people you get in that DNA sample, particularly unknown people's DNA, the harder it is to just isolate one person's out of that. And then she added the sentence that should have stopped every casual conversation about when the results were coming. She said, "So if they are struggling with it, that tells me it's a very difficult sample." CeCe Moore. 300 cold cases resolved. Chief genetic genealogist at the most advanced forensic genealogy operation in the country. She said, if they are struggling with it, the sample is very difficult. They were struggling with it. And the specific reason they were struggling is what April Stonehouse, the forensic science professor at Arizona State University, who appeared on Brian Entin's May special, explained in the clearest technical language anyone has used in the public discussion of this case. April Stonehouse, forensic science professor at Arizona State University, former DNA analyst for government crime labs, not a commentator, not a pundit, a working forensic scientist who has processed DNA evidence in the same kind of analysis being applied to the Nancy Guthrie samples. She appeared on News Nation Presents The Nancy Guthrie Mystery, the special that Brian Entin anchored and that aired on the CW on May 6th. And she said this. She explained the core issue. When a crime scene produces DNA from more than one person, analysts face what is known as a mixture. Simple mixtures, 2 people, are manageable. Complex mixtures, 3, 4, 5 contributors, are categorically different problems. When you get to mixtures of 3 and 4 and 5 people, she said, those are called complex mixtures. And then Brian Entin asked the direct question that the audience needed answered. He asked, does complexity mean more time? Stonehouse's answer was direct. She said, it can take more time, or it can take more DNA, and so you basically are at the mercy of whatever the suspect left behind. At the mercy of whatever the suspect left behind. 6 words that contain the complete scientific truth of why this investigation's DNA results are taking this long. The analyst does not get to choose how much DNA the suspect deposited. The analyst does not get to choose how many contributors are in the mixture. The analyst does not get to choose the ratio of each contributor's material to the total sample. Those things are fixed by whatever happened in that house on the night of January 31st, 2026. And Stonehouse also confirmed the specific scale of the DNA operation in this case. She noted that the Nancy Guthrie case currently has DNA evidence being analyzed at 5 separate laboratories. 5. That is not a detail that had been prominently reported before her interview. 5 separate laboratories working Nancy Guthrie DNA evidence simultaneously. That is not the picture of a case where the investigation is waiting for one lab to finish one test. That is the picture of a massive, parallel, multi-institutional forensic effort working multiple samples from multiple sources, each requiring its own specialized analysis pipeline. Now let's come to the thing that Brian Entin's reporting revealed that is genuinely shocking. The thing that is not what you think. The thing that most people following this case have not fully absorbed, even though CeCe Moore said it clearly, on camera, in March. The technology needed to separate the DNA in this case, to deconvolute the specific complex mixture recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home, may not have fully existed when the investigation began. Let me say that again. The software, the bioinformatic tool, the specific computational method required to separate the individual DNA profiles inside the complex mixture found in Nancy Guthrie's home. As of March 2026, as of when Sheriff Nanos was telling a neighborhood watch group it might take a year, that software either did not exist in deployable form or was not yet accessible to the FBI and to DNA Labs International in the form they needed. CeCe Moore said it on camera on a national broadcast. The interviewer, Natasha Zuvis, asked her directly, was it possible that the technology does not yet exist? Moore's answer was, right, at least not that DNA Labs International and the FBI has access to. The technology does not exist in the form they need. That was CeCe Moore in March 2026, describing the state of the forensic science as applied to the Nancy Guthrie evidence. And then she explained the specific technical reason. She said, the newer SNIP testing, single nucleotide polymorphism analysis, the whole genome approach that modern forensic genealogy uses instead of STR profiling, is still lagging behind when it comes to sorting out mixtures. The companies working with law enforcement to create DNA profiles using whole genome sequencing do not yet have reliable techniques to deconvolute mixture samples using that platform. This is the wall Brian Entin's reporting was pointing at in March when he said, problems getting it into different databases. It was not a bureaucratic problem. It was not a backlog problem. It was a problem at the frontier of forensic science itself. The specific problem that the combination of a complex mixture and a rootless hair and a whole genome sequencing approach produces when the deconvolution software that the analysis requires does not yet fully exist. Let's talk about the rootless hair specifically, because it is the second major technical layer of the delay explanation, and it intersects with the mixture problem in a way that compounds both challenges. The hairs recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home included at least one rootless hair. Rootless means exactly what it sounds like. The hair was shed naturally or broken, without the follicular root tag that anchors the hair to the scalp, and that is the richest single source of nuclear DNA in a hair sample. Here is why that matters. Standard forensic hair DNA analysis, the kind available before whole genome sequencing, relied primarily on mitochondrial DNA, which is present in the hair shaft in abundant copies. Mitochondrial DNA can tell you the maternal lineage of whoever left the hair. It can tell you if two hairs came from the same individual. But mitochondrial DNA cannot generate a unique individual profile. Thousands of people can share the same mitochondrial DNA sequence. It cannot produce an STR profile. It cannot be uploaded to SOTUS for a direct identification match. And it cannot be used for forensic genealogy through consumer databases. Nuclear DNA, the full genomic material that produces unique individual profiles, is present in the hair shaft in trace, degraded, fragmented amounts. The follicular root tag contains abundant nuclear DNA. The rootless shaft contains almost none, and what it does contain is broken into short, degraded fragments that fail standard STR extraction protocols. For most of forensic DNA's history, a rootless hair was a dead end for individual identification purposes. You could get mitochondrial data. You could not get a nuclear profile. You could not get CODIS comparable data. You could not get genealogy database material. But CeCe Moore said something in April that changed the entire picture. She said, "Advancements in whole genome sequencing, specifically the ancient DNA methodology developed to extract and sequence the degraded, fragmented nuclear DNA from fossils and historical biological samples, have now made it possible to recover usable nuclear DNA from rootless hair. Not from every rootless hair, not in every case, but potentially in this case, with this sample, using the FBI laboratories' resources." She called it a Hail Mary. She said the FBI would get another chance with the new evidence. The Hail Mary framing is precise. It acknowledges the technical uncertainty. The whole genome sequencing of rootless hair nuclear DNA is not guaranteed to produce usable data. But it also acknowledges the realistic possibility, because the same ancient DNA methodology that recovered genomic sequences from 40,000-year-old human bones has been successfully applied to forensic rootless hair in cases where the technology was previously said to be impossible. So now you have the full picture of why the FBI requested the hair specifically. Not the blood, not the glove, the hair. Because the hair represents the pathway to the thing that the blood and the glove have not yet produced. A genomic profile from an unknown contributor that can be loaded into a forensic genealogy database, compared against consumer ancestry profiles, and used to build a family tree that leads to a name. Now let's talk about the 11 weeks, because the number 11 is the number that FBI Director Kash Patel used in the most pointed public statement the federal government has made about the evidence handling in this case. Here's the timeline precisely. The hair was recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home during the evidence collection process that began in early February 2026. The FBI requested the hair sample as part of their involvement in the investigation. That request was not honored immediately. The hair and the other DNA evidence went first to DNA Labs International in Florida. The Florida lab processed it. They ran the standard analysis. They got the partial profile from the complex mixture that was insufficient for CODIS. They documented the technical challenges. They held the evidence. And then, 11 weeks after the FBI had first requested the material, DNA Labs International transferred the hair sample to the FBI laboratory at Quantico. 11 weeks. The FBI statement said it plainly. The FBI requested this material over 2 months ago. The Pima County Sheriff's Office sent it to a private lab in Florida. 11 weeks later, that lab has now transferred an original hair sample to the FBI laboratory for testing. We remain fully committed to this investigation. Read that statement carefully. The FBI wrote that statement, published it publicly, confirmed the 11-week delay in formal institutional language, and then added, "We remain fully committed to this investigation." the kind of closing sentence you add when the earlier sentences in the paragraph have said something that requires reassurance that the institution is not withdrawing its commitment. 11 weeks. In a case involving a missing 84-year-old woman. In a case where the FBI director had already publicly described the first 4 days of the investigation as being locked out. From 4 days to 11 weeks. The accumulation of institutional friction in this case is not a background detail. It is one of the central documented facts that explains why, 4.5 months after Nancy Guthrie disappeared, the DNA results that everyone is waiting for have not yet been publicly confirmed. Let's walk through the specific sequence of the DNA investigation's journey step by step, because when you lay it out in order, the delay is not mysterious. It is explained, documented, and specific, and it is longer and more complicated than most people realize. Step 1. February 2026. Evidence collected at the scene. Blood, glove, hairs, items processed at the scene by the Pima County Sheriff's Department's forensic unit. Step 2. Early February 2026. Evidence sent to DNA Labs International in Florida. Not to Quantico, not to the FBI. To a private contractor the Sheriff's Office had an existing relationship with. FBI kept out for 4 days per Cash Patel. Plain on standby, not used. Step 3. DNA Labs International runs standard STR analysis. Returns a partial profile. Insufficient for CODIS matching. Discovers the complex mixture. Multiple contributors not separable with available tools. Reports to the Sheriff's Office that results could take weeks, months, or up to a year. Step 4. February 20th, 2026. Sheriff Nanos publicly confirms the DNA is mixed. Says the lab has challenges with it. Says results could take weeks, months, or maybe a year. Step 5. February 22nd, 2026. Fox News digital sources confirmed the partial profile was insufficient for CODIS. CeCe Moore comments publicly for the first time, saying a complex mixture is much more difficult to work with. Step 6, March 7th, 2026. Brian Entin reports on News Nation that investigators are having problems getting it into different databases. The first public confirmation that the obstacle is not just the mixture's complexity, but the database pathway itself. Step 7, March 2026. CeCe Moore tells a national broadcast that the Deconvolution software needed to separate this specific mixture may not exist yet, at least not in the form accessible to DNA Labs International and the FBI. Says a year timeline would suggest the science needs to advance. Step 8, mid-April 2026. Brian Entin breaks the story. Sources confirm that hairs from inside Nancy Guthrie's home have been sent to the FBI laboratory at Quantico for advanced analysis. 11 weeks after the FBI first requested the material. Step 9, April 18th, 2026. CeCe Moore appears on News Nation with Brian Entin, describes the rootless hair as a potential Hail Mary, confirms the FBI will get another chance, explains that recent advances in whole genome sequencing of rootless hair nuclear DNA make the sample potentially analyzable in ways that were not previously possible. Says a company planning to release new mixture deconvolution software has probably rushed that development specifically because of this case's profile. Step 10, May 6th, 2026. The CW airs News Nation presents The Nancy Guthrie Mystery, anchored by Brian Entin. April Stonehouse of Arizona State University confirms DNA evidence is at 5 separate labs. Confirms complex mixtures of 3, 4, and 5 contributors take significantly more time and require more DNA material. Step 11, May 5th, 2026. FBI Director Kash Patel publicly confirms on Sean Hannity's podcast that the FBI was kept out for 4 days and criticizes the Florida lab decision. Step 12, active analysis continues at Quantico and 4 other labs. That is not a story of results taking a long time because investigators are slow. That is a documented, sourced, chronological account of specific institutional decisions and specific scientific limitations that together produce the current state of the investigation. Now let's talk about the piece that CeCe Moore revealed in April that is genuinely the most forward-looking development in this entire DNA story. The piece that tells you where this is going, not just why it has taken this long, but what is happening right now that nobody is fully explaining. Moore said something extraordinary. She said that a company, or companies, that had been planning to release a new mixture deconvolution software package has probably rushed that development because of this case. Read that carefully. A private forensic technology company, which had been developing new software designed specifically to separate complex DNA mixtures of the kind that are unsolvable by existing tools, accelerated its release timeline. Not because the software was ready in the normal commercial development sense, but because this case, the Nancy Guthrie case, is so high profile, so scrutinized, so publicly documented that the demand for the solution has compressed the timeline. That is an extraordinary statement. It means the commercial and scientific incentive structure of the forensic technology industry has been altered by the public attention on this investigation. A software product that might have taken another 6 months or a year to reach the law enforcement market has been pushed forward because the market need, one specific, enormously visible, nationally followed case, created pressure that normal development cycles do not have. The implication for the investigation is direct. If that deconvolution software has been rushed and deployed, or is in advanced testing with the FBI's forensic laboratory right now, then the technical wall that Moore identified in March as possibly requiring the science to advance has either been partially addressed or is in the process of being addressed. The software that did not fully exist in March, that may now exist, and may now be running on the Nancy Guthrie mixture at Quantico. Here is the one thing that still complicates even the best possible forensic outcome. The thing that Brian Entin reported early and that has remained a persistent limiting factor even as the technology has advanced. Consumer DNA databases, GEDmatch, family tree DNA, DNA Justice. These are the databases that forensic genealogy investigators are permitted to upload law enforcement DNA profiles to under current legal and policy frameworks. They are the opt-in platforms where individuals can voluntarily submit their profiles specifically to allow potential law enforcement matching. They are the databases that IGG investigations use to find the distant relatives whose family trees lead to suspects. The problem is the size. The consumer databases, Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, collectively hold somewhere in the range of 40 million profiles. Those are the databases that genealogical genealogists would most want access to for a case like this. Those are the databases where the probability of finding a biological relative of whoever was inside Nancy Guthrie's home is highest. But law enforcement is not permitted to upload crime scene profiles to those databases. Privacy policies prohibit it. Corporate terms of service prohibit it. Current legal frameworks have not extended law enforcement access to those repositories. GEDmatch, Family Tree DNA, and DNA Justice, the platforms that do allow law enforcement uploads, together hold under 2 million profiles, against 40 million. The difference is a factor of 20. The forensic genealogy investigation running the Nancy Guthrie evidence has access to less than 5% of the consumer DNA database universe. CeCe Moore identified this as a significant limiting factor in February. It remains a significant limiting factor in June. Not because the science has failed, but because the science can only work with the material it is allowed to access. And the material it is allowed to access, as powerful as the IGG methodology is, as transformative as it was in the Golden State Killer case and the Long Island serial killer case, is a fraction of the full picture. Let's bring it together, because the complete answer to why the DNA results are taking this long is not one thing. It is a specific sequence of things, institutional, scientific, technological, and legal, that together produce the timeline this investigation has followed. 1. The evidence went to the wrong lab first. An 84-year-old woman was taken from her home. The FBI had a plane on standby. The sheriff sent the DNA to a Florida private contractor. The FBI director confirmed this publicly and described it as a critical failure. 2. The DNA is a complex mixture of multiple contributors. Standard forensic STR analysis returned a partial profile insufficient for CODIS. Not because the lab failed, because that is what complex mixture analysis returns when the sample's ratio and contributor count fall outside the range that standard tools can resolve. 3. The deconvolution software needed to separate this specific mixture did not fully exist in deployable form when the analysis began. CeCe Moore said it clearly. The technology needed to advance before the sample could be properly processed. 4. The rootless hair required whole genome sequencing using ancient DNA methodology, a process that is not a routine lab operation, but a specialized, time-intensive, uncertainty-containing technique that produces useful results in some cases and inconclusive results in others. 5. The evidence sat in Florida for 11 weeks while the FBI's resources waited at Quantico. 6. The database the forensic genealogy investigation can use holds under 2 million profiles, 20 times fewer profiles than the consumer databases the methodology works best against. 7. A private forensic technology company has likely rushed the release of new mixture deconvolution software specifically because of this case's profile. 8. DNA evidence is now at 5 separate laboratories. Active analysis is underway. The FBI has had the hair since mid-April. 9. The whole genome sequencing of a complex mixture from a rootless hair, deconvoluted by software that was not available 3 months ago, uploaded to a genealogy database, and subjected to forensic genealogy tree building. That process takes the time it takes. Not because anyone is moving slowly, because the science operates on its own timeline, governed by the biology of the samples, the computing power of the instruments, the depth of the genealogical records, and the human expertise of the analysts building the trees. Brian Entin knew this. He has known this since February. He has been reporting it in pieces, a sentence here, a confirmed detail there, with the specific care of a journalist who understands that in an active investigation, how you report the science matters as much as what you report. And what he revealed, put together, is the answer the public has been asking for since February 2nd. Why is it taking so long? Because the evidence arrived at the right institution 11 weeks late. Because the mixture is one of the hardest the technology currently faces. Because the software to solve it either did not exist or was not yet available when the analysis began. Because the database the investigators are allowed to use is a fraction of the size they need. And because the science, even now, even running at the speed that a $1.2 million reward and the full institutional weight of the FBI and 5 separate laboratories and a rush-release deconvolution software package can produce, is doing something that has never been done before with this specific combination of sample type, mixture complexity, and methodological challenge.